1. c4. The world champion Mikhail Botvinnik, known for his deep strategic preparation, opens with the English, a flexible choice to steer the game into positional channels. 1. g6. Robert James Fischer responds with a hyper-modern setup, preparing a fianchetto and keeping his options open for either a King's Indian or a Grunfeld defense. 2. d4. Botvinnik immediately seizes the center, transposing into a queen's pawn game and setting the stage for a classical confrontation against Fischer's flank-based strategy. 2. Nf6. Fischer develops his knight, a standard and logical move that continues to maintain flexibility while controlling key central squares from the side. 3. nc3. A powerful developing move. Botvinnik reinforces his central control and prepares to challenge Fischer's hypermodern setup in the most principled and ambitious manner. 3. d5. Fischer commits to his beloved Grunfeld defense, a combative opening where he immediately challenges White's center after temporarily ceding it, creating an imbalanced struggle. 4. nf3. Botvinnik develops his kingside knight, continuing with the main line and preparing to complete his classical pawn center, a direct challenge to the Grunfeld philosophy. 4. bg7. The iconic Grunfeld bishop arrives on its best square. From g7, this piece will become a strategic monster, exerting immense pressure on the long diagonal for the entire game. 5. qb3. Botvinnik chooses the sharp and highly respected Russian system, immediately putting pressure on the d5 pawn and forcing Fischer to make a critical decision in the center. 5. dxc4. The main and most principled reply. Fischer captures the pawn, giving up the center but gaining valuable time by forcing the white queen to move again. 6. qxc4. The queen recaptures, and White has achieved the classic big center. The strategic battle is now defined: White's space versus Black's piece activity and pressure. 6. Fischer quickly castles his king to safety, connecting his rooks and preparing to launch his characteristic counterattack against White's imposing central pawn mass. 7. e4. Botvinnik solidifies his dream center, creating a formidable pawn phalanx. This is the ultimate test of the Grunfeld, a direct attempt to suffocate Black and prove the superiority of space. 7. bg4. The sharp Smyslov variation. Fischer develops his bishop with an annoying pin on the f3 knight, immediately creating tactical tension and disrupting White's smooth central consolidation. 8. b3. Botvinnik calmly breaks the pin and continues his development. He is a master of these positions and is unafraid to enter the sharp theoretical battle that Fischer has initiated. 8. nfd7. The classic Grunfeld knight retreat. Fischer prepares to challenge the White center with nb6 and enc6 without allowing simplifying exchanges that would favor White's spatial advantage. 9. b2. A solid developing move. Botvinnik prepares to complete his development and keeps a careful eye on the central tension that is slowly but surely building. 9. nc6. Fischer brings his final minor piece into the game, adding more pressure to the d4 pawn and completing his ideal Grunfeld development setup. 10. rd1. Botvinnik improves the position of his rook, adding another defender to the d4 pawn and preparing to contest the open d-file, a key strategic element of the position. 10. nb6. The knight arrives on its classic attacking post in the Grunfeld. From b6, it puts pressure on the d5 and c4 squares, creating immediate problems for White to solve. 11. eqc5. The queen sidesteps the knight's attack and maintains its central influence. The tension is palpable as both players maneuver their pieces for the decisive middle game clash. 11. qd6. A powerful centralizing move from Fischer. He challenges the White queen, hoping to force an exchange that would relieve some of the pressure and highlight the weaknesses in White's pawn structure. 12. h3. Botvinnik forces the issue, challenging the pinning bishop. This is a critical decision that will have a profound impact on the pawn structure and the course of the game. 12. bxf3. Fischer decides to trade his bishop for the knight, a major strategic decision. He gives up the bishop pair but inflicts a permanent weakness on White in the form of doubled f-pawns. 13. gxf3. The forced recapture shatters White's kingside pawn structure and opens the g-file for his rook, but the doubled pawns will be a long-term target for Fischer's pieces. 13. rfd8. Fischer brings his final piece into the game, placing his rook on the open d-file and completing his perfectly coordinated setup. He is now ready for the middle game battle. 14, d5, but Vinnik strikes in the center, a typical attempt to exploit his space advantage. This pawn thrust aims to cramp black's pieces and seize the initiative. 14, n5, Fischer's knight finds a magnificent outpost on e5. From this dominating square, it restricts white's pieces and becomes a major thorn in his side. 15, nb5, but Vinnik activates his knight with a powerful jump, creating immediate threats against the black queen and adding another piece to his central attack. 15, qf6, Fischer's queen finds a surprisingly aggressive square, creating counterthreats and demonstrating his unwillingness to be pushed into a passive defensive posture. 16, f4, a very aggressive pawn thrust. But Vinnik uses his doubled pawn as a weapon, kicking the black knight and seizing even more space in the center of the board. 16, ned7, the knight is forced to retreat, but it moves to a flexible square from where it can be rerouted to a more active post, keeping the position full of dynamic tension. 17, e5, the central battle explodes. But Vinnik pushes his pawn forward again, and Fischer responds with a stunning and deeply calculated queen sacrifice. 17, qxf4, a brilliant and shocking queen sacrifice. Fischer gives up his most powerful piece for two minor pieces, correctly judging that his active pieces and white's weak pawn structure will provide full compensation. 18, bxf4, but Vinnik has no choice but to accept the sacrifice, entering the wild and uncharted territory that Fischer has created. The game is now incredibly complex. 18, nxc5, the recapture. The material is now roughly balanced, queen versus rook, bishop, and pawn, but the strategic situation is unique. The battle of ideas is fully engaged. 19, nxc7, the white knight captures a pawn and is now a monster deep in black's territory. However, it is also somewhat cut off from the rest of its army. 19, rak8, Fischer calmly activates his rook, attacking the adventurous white knight and beginning the process of coordinating his pieces against white's exposed position. 20 d6, but Vinnik pushes his passed pawn forward, his main trump in the position. This pawn will be a constant source of danger and the focus of the game. 20 exd6, Fischer exchanges pawns, opening the e-file for his pieces and preparing to create a blockade against the dangerous white passed pawn. 21 exd6, the recapture. The white passed pawn on the 6th rank is a monster, but it is also a weakness that can be attacked and surrounded by black's swarm of minor pieces. 21 bxb2, Fischer's bishop captures the b-pawn, eliminating a key defender and creating a long-term strategic advantage on the queenside. The position is balanced on a razor's edge. 22 but Vinnik finally castles his king to safety, connecting his rooks. He has weathered the initial storm and is now ready to consolidate and push his passed pawn. 22, nbd7, a calm and precise move from Fischer. He brings his knight into the game to create a powerful blockade on the d-file, neutralizing the threat of the passed pawn. 23, rd5, but Vinnik improves the position of his rook, adding more support to the passed pawn and preparing to challenge black's control of the d-file. 23, b6, a solid and necessary prophylactic move. Fischer shores up his queenside pawn structure and prevents any nasty invasions by the white pieces. 24, bf3, the bishop repositions to a more active diagonal, from where it supports the passed pawn and keeps an eye on the entire board. 24, n6, a brilliant knight maneuver that challenges the powerful white bishop and forces a favorable exchange, simplifying the position to black's advantage. 25, nex6, but Vinnik is forced to trade, but this gives up his bishop pair and allows Fischer's pawn structure to be slightly improved. 25, fex6, the recapture opens the f-file for the black rook, giving him a new avenue of attack and adding another piece to the central struggle. 26, rd3, the rook is forced into a slightly passive retreat, a clear sign that Fischer's precise and energetic play has seized the initiative. 26, nc5, the black knight lands on a magnificent central outpost. From this square, it dominates the board and is a perfect blockader of the d6 pawn. 27, re3, the white rook finds a more active square, preparing to challenge black's control and create its own threats, but Fischer has a powerful response. 27, e5, a powerful pawn break. Fischer sacrifices a pawn to shatter white's central coordination, open lines for his pieces, and eliminate the powerful white bishop. 28, b5, the forced recapture. Botvinnik must accept the sacrifice, but this allows a series of exchanges that will lead to a completely equal endgame. 28, b5, Fischer continues the forcing sequence, trading bishops and clarifying the path to a draw. His judgment in this complex position is superb. 29, rex 5, the recapture. The smoke has cleared from the middle game explosion, and the game has transitioned into a rook endgame where the chances are perfectly balanced. 29, rx d6, Fischer captures the monster passed pawn, the final culmination of his brilliant defensive and counterattacking strategy. The position is now dead equal. 30, re7, the white rook invades the 7th rank, the last hope of creating some winning chances, but Fischer's defense is as precise as his attack. 30, rd7, the simplest and best reply. Fischer offers a rook trade, knowing that the resulting endgame is a trivial and easy draw for him. 31, rx d7, Botvinnik accepts the inevitable, trading rooks and heading for a simplified endgame where a draw is the only logical result. 31, nx d7, the recapture. The game has simplified into a rook and bishop versus rook and knight endgame. With correct play, this is a theoretical draw. 32, bg4, Botvinnik tries to create some problems with his active bishop, but Fischer's pieces are well coordinated and easily parry the threats. 32, rc7, the rook comes to the defense, a simple and effective solution to the problem. Fischer is giving his legendary opponent no chances. 33, 1 rupee, the rook continues to probe, but there are no real weaknesses in the black position to attack. The draw is becoming more and more certain. 33, kf7, the king becomes an active piece. A crucial part of endgame technique, Fischer brings his king towards the center to help with the defense and offense. 34, kg2, the white king also begins its journey to the center. In the endgame, the king is a powerful fighting piece for both sides. 34, kn5, Fischer's knight finds a powerful central square, from where it controls key points and is superior to the white bishop in this specific position. 35, re3, the rook continues its patient maneuvering, but Fischer's position is a fortress with no weaknesses. There is nothing for white to attack. 35, re7, Fischer once again offers the rook trade, the simplest and most effective way to secure the draw and end the game. 36, rf3+, Botvinnik declines the trade, trying one last time to create some attacking chances, but Fischer's king is perfectly safe. 36, kg7, the king simply sidesteps the check. It is a picture of perfect safety, and the draw is now inevitable. 37, rc3, the rook shifts its focus to the queenside, but there are no weaknesses to be found there either. Fischer's defense has been flawless. 37, re4, Fischer's rook becomes the more active of the two, creating small problems for white to solve and demonstrating that black is in no danger. 38, bd1, the bishop is forced into a passive retreat, a clear sign that white has no more attacking ideas and is content with the draw. 38, rd4, the black rook continues to harass the white pieces, demonstrating that it is black, if anyone, who is playing for more than a draw. 39, bc2, the bishop returns to a more active square, but the position remains completely balanced. The players are now just going through the motions. 39, kf6, the king becomes an even more powerful piece, marching up the board to control more territory and support its own pieces. 40, kf3, the white king also continues its march, and the two monarchs now stare each other down across the center of the board. 40, kg5, the black king is now an aggressive, attacking piece, a remarkable transformation from the start of the game. 41, kg3, the white king holds its ground. The position is in a state of perfect equilibrium, and neither side can make any real progress. 41, n4+, a brilliant little tactical shot to force the final simplification. This knight fork forces a trade of the minor pieces, leading to a trivially drawn rook endgame. 42, bs4, Botvinnik has no choice but to accept the trade, which will liquidate the game into a completely drawn position. 42, Rex 4, the final minor pieces are off the board. The resulting rook and pawn endgame is a well-known theoretical draw, and the game will end shortly. 43, Ra3, the white rook tries to create some threats against the queenside pawns, but the black rook is perfectly placed to defend. 43, Re7, a simple and effective defensive move. The rook controls the 7th rank and prepares to meet any threats that white might create. 44, Rf3, the rook returns to the kingside, but there is nothing to be done. The position is a dead draw, and both players know it. 44, Rc7, Fischer's rook continues to be the more active of the two, a small moral victory in a drawn game against the world champion. 45, 4, Botvinnik creates a passed pawn, but in a rook endgame, this is often a weakness rather than a strength, as it is difficult to defend. 45, Rc5, Fischer's rook takes up a powerful post, from where it attacks the weak pawns and completely paralyzes the white position. 46, Rf7, the white rook is forced into an aggressive posture to create counterplay, but this also allows black's rook to become even more active. 46, Ra5, the black rook switches its focus to the queenside, creating its own threats and demonstrating that white is the one who must be careful. 47, Rxh7, the white rook captures a pawn, but this allows black's rook to do the same, and the resulting position is still a complete and utter draw. 47, Rxa4, the black rook captures the pawn, and now both sides have passed pawns. The game has become a race, but a race that will end in a tie. 48, H4+, a check to force the black king to a slightly less active square, but it does not change the fundamental evaluation of the position. 48, Kf5, the king is forced back, but it is still a powerful piece and will be able to help its own passed pawns in the future. 49, Rf7+, another check, but the black king easily sidesteps the threat. But Botvinnik is just trying to make sure there are no tricks. 49, K5, the king heads back towards the center, the most powerful area of the board for a monarch in the endgame. 50, Rg7, the rook continues to harass from the side, a classic endgame technique, but Fischer's defense is more than up to the task. 50, Ra1, the black rook creates its own threats against the white king, a perfect example of the principle of active defense. 51, Kf3, the white king is forced to move to deal with the threats, a clear sign that black is the one in control of the position. 51, b5, the passed b-pawn begins to march. Fischer creates another passed pawn, and now white is the one who must be very careful. 52, h5, the white h-pawn also begins to march. The game is a thrilling race of passed pawns, but with correct play, it should still be a draw. 52, Ra3+, a useful check to drive the white king away from the defense of its own pawns. Every tempo is crucial in a pawn race. 53, Kg2, the king is forced to a more passive square. Fischer is playing the endgame with incredible energy and precision. 53, Gxh5, the h-pawns are exchanged, clarifying the situation. The game is now a race between white's f-pawn and black's b and a pawns. 54, Rg5+, the rook attacks the weak pawn, a good defensive technique, but Fischer's king is perfectly placed to defend it. 54, Kd6, the king becomes a defender, a beautiful multi-purpose piece that can switch between attack and defense in an instant. 55, Rxb5, the rook captures the pawn, but now black gets a new passed pawn on the h-file, and the race continues. 55, h4, the passed h-pawn is a new and dangerous threat that white must deal with immediately, giving black more time for his own plans. 56, f4, the f-pawn begins its own desperate march to the queening square. The tension is at its absolute peak in this incredible endgame. 56, kc6, the king becomes an attacker again. It attacks the white rook, forcing it to move and gaining another crucial tempo in the race. 57, rb8, the rook is forced to retreat to a more passive square, a clear victory for Fischer in this phase of the endgame. 57, h3+, the pawn takes another inexorable step forward, creating a deadly threat and putting immense pressure on the white position. 58, kh2, the king is forced to the corner of the board, a very dangerous place to be, but the only way to stop the immediate promotion of the pawn. 58, F5, the second passed pawn begins to march. Fischer now has two connected passed pawns, an almost unstoppable force in a rook endgame. 59, F5, the f-pawn takes another step, but it is a lonely warrior fighting against a coordinated black army of king and pawns. 59, KC7, the king attacks the rook again, forcing it to move and demonstrating the complete domination of the black king. 60, RB5, the rook is forced to a passive square once again. It is completely outplayed by the black king, a remarkable sight. 60, KD6, the king now switches its focus from attack to defense, preparing to march back and stop the dangerous white f-pawn. 61, F6, the pawn is now only 2 steps away from becoming a queen, but Fischer's king is a superhero and will arrive just in time. 61, Q6, the king arrives in the nick of time. It is a beautiful illustration of the power of an active king in the endgame. The pawn is now stopped. 62, RB6+, a desperate check, but the king will simply step in front of the pawn, creating an unbreakable blockade. 62, KF7, the perfect blockading square. The king is now a fortress, and the white f-pawn will never advance another step. 63, RS6, the white rook is forced to abandon its passed pawn and desperately try to stop black's own passed pawns on the queenside. 63, KG6, the king becomes an attacker again, preparing to support the advance of its own passed pawns. The versatility of the king is amazing. 64, RC6, the white rook desperately shuffles back and forth, but it cannot be in two places at once. It cannot stop both the a-pawn and the h-pawn. 64, F4, the passed a-pawn begins its final, victorious march. There is nothing white can do to stop it from becoming a new queen. 65, RA6, the rook returns to the queenside, but it is too late. The pawn is too fast and too well supported. 65, KF7, the king holds the blockade on the kingside, a calm and confident move in a completely winning position. 66, RC6, the rook is helpless. It can only watch as the a-pawn marches down the board to victory. The game is over. 66, RD3, a clever little move to prepare for any last-ditch tricks, demonstrating Fischer's incredible attention to detail even in a winning position. 67, RA6, the rook returns once again, but the pawn is unstoppable. The rest is a simple matter of pushing the pawn to the end. 67, A3, the pawn reaches the third rank, and its advance is inexorable. The new queen will arrive in just a few moves. 68, KG1, the final, sad move of the game. The white king can only watch in horror as its kingdom collapses. The players agreed to a draw in this completely winning position for black, a controversial end to the tournament.